굉장히 많은 경제 위기를 겪으셨잖아요. 어떻게 그 위기를 헤쳐나갔고 골드만삭스를 어떻게 지켜냈는지.
The big one, obviously, was the global financial crisis in which Lehman Brothers, Bear Stearns, and Merrill Lynch stopped existing. We were very unusual in not losing money, partly because we'd done so well, and a lot because
AI에 대해서 어떻게 생각을 하고 계신가요? 월스트리트의 역할도 많이 바뀌게 될까요?
I've observed technology. I started in 1982 in the industry. I'll tell you what won't change.
네, 여러분 안녕하세요. 신하영입니다. 각 분야의 전설이라고 불리는 글로벌 리더들의 지혜를 깊이 있게 들어보는 시간입니다. 자, 오늘은 월스트리트의 전설이자 경제 위기에도 굴하지 않고 골드만삭스를 세계 최고의 은행으로 이끈 전 CEO 로이드 블랭크파인님을 모셨습니다. 이 생존지능이라는 저서가 출간된 기념으로 아주 어렵게 모실 수 있었는데요. 안녕하세요. 자기소개 부탁드립니다.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm very happy to be with you.
So congratulations on the book. This is the Korean version. Have you seen it?
No, I haven't, but I have to say, I'm very impressed by the picture you have in front. Who is that good-looking guy?
Who is he? Who is he?
I don't know. I can't imagine.
자, 이 책 어떤 책인지 간단하게 소개해 주실 수 있을까요?
It's a memoir, so it's a little bit of a life story. It's a little bit of a how-to book about getting through institutions and working your way up in a complex global institution. It's a little bit of a financial history. It seemed to be a crisis of the century every 4 or 5 years. And of course, what everybody and everyone in your audience will of course, still remember the global financial crisis, which was really about 17 or 18 years ago, but it still feels fresh in the minds of many people.
Right.
And it should feel fresh because we're all still living through the repercussions of it.
이 글을 쓰시면서 이런 분들은 꼭 이 책을 읽었으면 좋겠다 하셨던 분들이 있으셨을까요?
One of the things that I try to do in this, the kind of career I had, which, accessible. There are things in this world, you can point to some things that, how could I ever do what Elon Musk does? How can you be such a I can't do that. I'm not wired to be that way. But, the kind of the career I had, it involves hard work and you have to be lucky enough, but it's doable. And even if you didn't get quite to be the head of the firm, you could certainly rise high enough and have a very, very satisfying career. It's about resilience and about persistence, about taking advantage of opportunity. Is not asserted in a pedantic way. It comes across through stories and my own experiences, and people can draw the lessons.
사실 이 책에도 나와 있지만 그 성장 배경에 대해서도 말씀을 해주셨어요. 넉넉지 못한 환경에서 자라서 어떻게 결국 그 CEO의 자리까지 올라가실 수 있었던 걸까요?
I think, and in part my background helped me with this. Take the train, public transportation, 2 hours to get to a stadium, to walk up and down and sell hot dogs and as a young kid. But people do that and people should do that. You learn a lot from those, experiences. One of the points I'd say is I grew up, my dad was a mail sorter in the post office. He was the guy at night that pushed the letters into little cubby holes so the mailman would carry them the next day. Today, that's all done by machines. And one of the things, my parents didn't go to college, and I had an older sibling who didn't go to college, but I wanted to go to college. And for me, that was the path out of, a distressed neighborhood. And I didn't know necessarily where it would take me, but I was motivated to get out of where I was. But these things are also character building. I think successful in a firm like Goldman Sachs, where there's a lot of people who think they're the smartest people in the world at what they do. And many of them are actually right. They are the smartest people in the world at what they do. They're very good at their jobs. They make a lot of money. But I think I was able to work with people in a non-threatening way to them. And I'd say the reason why I was able to grow in the firm, I don't think I was the best investment banker in the firm. I don't think I was the best trader in the firm. I wasn't the best salesman in the firm, but I was good enough at all those things. But I think I was very good, very, very good at getting people who weren't naturally able to work together to work together and to contribute to kind kind of getting people to sacrifice for the benefit of the firm. And if you sacrifice for the benefit of the firm, in other words, if you keep your own ego in check and you're willing to be gracious and let other people have opportunities, and these things happen all the time. So I was able to persuade people that if you forego opportunities, if you throw in, if you act in a collegial way, in an unselfish way, it makes the firm more influential. It makes the platform better. And then you can use that platform in your life. It becomes more prestigious to be a partner of Goldman Sachs.
Right. So it's not just about the financial incentives.
No, it never is. If you don't have enough money, then it is about financial incentives. But when you have enough and you have more than enough, it's much less about financial incentives because that doesn't provide much more of an incentive. It's about other things. It's about the influence, it's about whether you enjoy your colleagues. It's about whether you enjoy teamwork. And by the way, people are wired differently. There are people who are wired to be loners, and there are people who like being part of a team. There's individual sports and there are team sports. And, investment banking and working at Goldman Sachs is definitely a team sport.
이 책에 정말 많은 부분이 골드만삭스의 CEO로서의 경험이 담겨 있는데요. 함께했던 사람들이 굉장히 똑똑하고 영향력 있고 부자인 거는 사실 말할 것도 없고요. 자, 이런 사람들과 함께 이제 생활을 했을 때 이들에게 공통적으로 보이는 어떤 특징 같은 것들이 있었을까요?
Sure. There's generalities to make. And if you think about it, it's all, sensible. People want to grow. Look, everybody wants to get paid 5% more than you can get that you're currently getting paid now. But especially early in your careers, people aren't trying to max out. Maybe some people are, but it's foolish to try to max out your compensation or your pay early in your career or your influence. What you want to do is you want to invest and grow so that you learn the skills, you get the experience, you make the relationships that will make you increasingly more important as you grow in your job and as you mature and as you age. What I try to say is the contract that I try to have with people is that I really care about your growth. And I will work hard to make you a better professional. And I used to say, you could be overpaid, you could feel underpaid at X or underpaid at 10X. Because your expectations, by the time, at 10X are so much greater, you deserve even more than that. In other words, I was there to make people's horizons better, to train them, to invest in them, to promote them, to let them carry them as far as their talent and their work ethic would take them. That's the dream. So I try to tell people how you behave and the reputation you get with other young people in this firm are going to stick with you for your professional life. So perform well, because people are going to remember how you are, and especially how people perform in the difficult times, in the crisis times. People of this generation, people who are starting out, getting out of school or going into school, kind of are being told by a lot of places to, just focus on tech, or focus on, here there's people who encourage other people not to get to a general education, not to get a liberal arts education, but focus. And some people are encouraged not even to drop out of college or not to go to college. I think that's a big mistake. I believe that in your younger educational years in university, that's to make yourself a well-rounded person, to learn. We don't know the way the economy is going to evolve. We're living on the cusp of great technological changes. Who knows what jobs are going to be important, what are going to be taken over by AI, won't be, what new things are going to be created. The point is not to be overly focused when you're young. Make yourself learn literature, learn history, because history tells you that things don't stay the same, but cycles repeat. Not exactly the same, but as the saying goes, history doesn't repeat, but it rhymes. That we've gone through bubbles before, whether it was the dot-com bubbles. We've gone through stressful times. When I was growing, we've gone through polarized times in the young people and old people more than today. But if you don't know that, you think this is the biggest crisis we've ever lived through, but it's not. We've gotten through these things before. So learning liberal arts is good for you as a person, but it's also good for your commercial life because it makes you more resilient, more flexible, more willing to embrace change if you are broad and not unduly focused on what's good today. And also good for your commercial life is it makes you a more interesting person.
Right.
And I don't care what AI goes, people are still going to have to deal with other people. people. People want to deal with people who are more interesting. And to make yourself overly narrow is another way of saying you're making yourself less interesting to other people. And so I think one of the mistakes that people make is to overly specialize and to promote just a technical education in what you think today will be your career when you become an analyst at Goldman Sachs or a new hire at McKinsey or an intern in a broadcasting firm. Plenty of time to learn the details of your career and your industry. But your younger era and your college years are for general education.
그 골드만 특유의 파트너십 컬처에 대해서 이야기를 좀 해보고 싶어요. 리더십 팀을 꾸릴 때 어떤 점을 가장 먼저 보셨는지 궁금합니다.
I think an important virtue is curiosity, wanting to know things. People who aren't just in their immediate job, but are looking to their left, looking to their right, and want to understand what everybody else is doing and has opinions about what everybody else is doing. You want people with big ears and big eyes that see the things around them, that ask questions because they're curious. I like people who want to learn and who are curious because you always have to learn. Even when you have the top job, you really have to learn because you can't do every job in the firm. You have to be able to ask good questions and get to the point. But I also want to say something about the partnership culture. It's really an ownership culture. We wanted to have, to be a CEO is different than being a senior partner. And I'll tell you, because in your CEO of a corporation is naturally a very hierarchical place where the CEO is on top and his word is law and you say something and people unquestioningly follow the instructions. In a partnership, by definition, the other senior people co-own the business. So their interest is not just in their narrow job, it's in how the whole firm works. And so in a partnership, you pay people not just on the basis of their performance, but how the whole firm does. People who are owners expect to get information about the whole firm, not just their area. They expect to have influence. If you're an owner, you expect to have influence on the whole. If you're a manager in a partnership, you don't just make decisions and expect people to follow them. You socialize the decisions. You let people weigh in and give their views. And even if you think they're wrong, you listen to them. And maybe you change your mind more because they're your because they own the firm also. That's the difference between a partnership culture and a regular firm. And I think Goldman Sachs was a partnership for 130-something years, went public, but still the firm runs like a partnership. And so we listen to our people. People junior in the organization have a lot of influence. Decision-making is a little slower because we socialize all the issues and problems, but you get a more stable organization because everyone is bought into it. And so I just want to explain what I mean when I say a partnership culture or an ownership culture.
So does that culture change when it's under pressure?
Well, I think it responds really well when it's because people aren't just thinking about my job and have I done it. People feel responsible for the whole. And they also feel, again, like owners, you can't walk away from it. All the crises that hit the market and some of the crises just hit Goldman Sachs along the way. We would get people didn't quit. They stayed and wanted to double up. They wanted to know how they could help. They felt, again, owner. And by the way, when people have left the firm, and I think Goldman is famous for this, it's a very valuable network. The alumni of the firm who, again, become even, some of them become very powerful, influential people away from their firm in their post-career. There are people out who've left the firm 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 20 years. They still identify as ex-Goldman, and it's important to them. And so, the firm nurtures that because it's very good for the overall success and influence of Goldman Sachs to have people who leave the firm and still care about it in a very big way. By the way, it goes both ways. We expect them to care about the firm and the firm still cares about them.
굉장히 많은 경제 위기를 겪으셨잖아요. 자, 그 위기에 대해서 좀 말씀을 해주시면 좋을 것 같아요. 어떻게 그 위기를 헤쳐나갔고 또 그 사이에서 골드만삭스를 어떻게 지켜냈는지 그 경험담 좀 말씀 부탁드립니다.
There was the, stock market crash in 87 and the sovereign wealth in 1990 and 1994 when interest rates were raised in Europe and long-term capital in 98 and the tech bubble bursting and the Asian financial crisis. These things kept coming along. And the big one, obviously, was the global financial crisis in which Goldman did reasonably well. We did not lose. We were very unusual in not losing money, mostly because we were we were big risk takers going in, but we hedged ourselves pretty well. We didn't make money, but we didn't lose money, which was a very big achievement at that time when other institutions in our space like Lehman Brothers and Bear Stearns and Merrill Lynch stopped existing. And yet we got through that and without major losses. But then we had a big reputational crisis afterwards because since we had done so, partly because we'd done so well and a lot because there was a lot of people from Goldman Sachs involved in government. Part of our nickname was Government Sachs because the Treasury Secretary and a lot of other people at that time and regulators had Goldman Sachs backgrounds. We were a wholesale firm. We don't deal with retail. There's nobody who has a checking account with Goldman Sachs or takes out a mortgage from Goldman Sachs. We're not a consumer retail business. And one of the consequences of that is we had no relationship with the general public. We had a big relationship with governments and big corporations and big pools of capital. That's a wholesale market. And that's what we did. We intermediated and worked with that segment of the world, but not with individuals. And guess what? Another name for individuals and consumers are citizens and taxpayers. And when the country got into distress, and we were a very easy target because we were powerful, influential, our people made a lot of money. We were at the center of a lot of things. We had people, alumni in government, and nobody really knew what we did or what we contributed or what the value of our activity was. And that was a very bad time to start to explain ourselves to a very suspicious population when we were getting very bad press every day. And so in hindsight, we should have done a better job of explaining to the public, which we, by the way, your audience will know Goldman Sachs because for the last 15 or 17, we've been doing exactly that. But previously, they wouldn't have. And so we learned that lesson the hard way, but that was something that in hindsight, would have done a lot different. We would have gone over and talked about what we did, explained what the value, Goldman Sachs in a lot of ways is the invisible hand in the economy, along with other firms as well. But we raise financing for industries and entrepreneurs and developers who have great ideas and need capital. And we have great relationships with the pools of capital who are looking for the opportunity to invest. And because of our good relationships and our long history and our knowledge of both sides, we have credibility with both sides. So we can persuade people with capital, you should invest in this company. And we could tell people who need capital, if you come with us and engage with us, we'll get you the capital at the best price with the best terms. And we're in the middle, kind of trying to be and being successfully trusted by both sides of that formula. And we help these sides get together. And that's what pushes the economy forward. So that's an explanation of what we do. And the other thing we do is we take away from people unwanted risks. So if a car company is in the business of making cars, but they have foreign exchange risk and they have interest rate risk, and maybe they have the risk of the price of aluminum getting out of control or the price of energy, we'll take on those risks for those people. We'll help hedge them out and we'll take those risks on ourselves and we'll manage those risks because we're good at risk management. So that's basically what a firm like Goldman Sachs does in the world. And doing those activities, raising capital, investing capital, risk managing for them really allows the kind of market economy to function. And I think that's what helps create entrepreneurs, new businesses, growth, wealth creation, jobs. So I think you can tell, I think it's a good thing.
사실 그 당시에 굉장히 많은 결정들을 내리셔야 했잖아요. 정말 수조 원의 돈들이 오고 가는 그런 결정들을 내리셔야 됐을 때 어떤 과정을 거쳐서 그 결정에 이르셨는지 너무 궁금합니다.
I don't want to enlarge the role. I don't know that we were made. Look, everything has consequences, but there was a lot going on and a lot of actors and a lot of, at the time, the biggest contribution we make is just doing our regular job, helping people manage their risk, get capital if they need it, invest if they have excess capital. And so I would say in terms of the decision making, of course, we think what's good for, doing things that are, supportive of the economy and not doing things that go the opposite way. But I'll tell you, I think our general business is generally, supportive of the economy, just as manufacturers who create jobs and create goods that people want and services. I don't know that they're thinking every day about the whole economy, but their role in the economy is advancing the economy. Same with us.
So do you have a set of questions that you ask yourself when you're making decisions? Or do you just kind of go with the flow or the situation?
We're generally involved in, or tend to be unique Should we take this company public? Should we, engage this activity? Should we take on this risk? How should we price the risk? But that's what we're really thinking of. From time to time, something is so consequential, we either will do it because of the huge effects it'll have or not do it because of the huge effects it'll have. But by and large, we're dealing with trying to support enterprises who are trying to, make their contribution to the economy. We're never sitting around the table thinking that we're negotiating, the end of NAFTA or the NATO treaty. But everybody has but the things we do, again, contribute to the creation of wealth and the growth of economies.
So let's talk a little bit about risk management. You talk a lot about that in the book. So is risk management more about understanding human behavior or understanding the market?
Well, they're both, yes, they're related because don't forget, they give out a Nobel Prize in economics, but it's really not a science. It's a social science. Why is it a social science? Because it involves behavior and human behavior. And when you're dealing with humans, you're dealing with feelings and sentiment. One day, nobody knows anything about AI. The next day, it's only AI. Did the world change that much? If we were dealing with physical laws, it wouldn't change that much from one day to the next. But when you're dealing with people, you're dealing with sentiment. And we're dealing with economics, and when you're dealing with markets, that's sentiment to the fifth power. Because, markets are all about sentiment and direction. So, yes, some of it feels very almost like physical laws where algorithms are helpful, but other stuff is just judgment. How are people going to react to this? You can go back in history and say, you can run a model and say, well, when things like this happened, this is how people have reacted in the past. But guess what? Today is not exactly like what happened yesterday, and people today aren't exactly like people were a generation ago. So you can run your thing through your models, but your models only tell you what happened back then. Everything is a bit different today, and people are different today. Look, when I was getting out of school, everyone had one job for life. If you changed job in your first 10 years after you got your first job, people thought you were erratic. Today, if you're in the same job for 10 years, people think you have no imagination. So people change, sentiment changes. Therefore, people have to approach. I remember when I was CEO of Goldman Sachs, I got a lot of advice from people who managed the firm before me. And I listened to it and I say, gee, it's helpful to get your advice, but I can't follow it. I remember saying to my very wise predecessor, the firm is a different place. We have partners who are Chinese and partners who are Russian, and I take business trips to Korea. When you were running Goldman Sachs, a big business trip was Chicago. Today, the firm is completely global. When you were running the firm, there was an Iron Curtain. These countries behind the Iron Curtain, they weren't part of the world you were occupying. Today, some of the biggest growth stories in the world are coming from that part of the world. And so things change, things are different, always evolve. It's not physical science, it's a social science.
AI를 말씀을 해주셨기 때문에 이제 AI 관련 질문을 좀 드리고 싶은데 에필로그 바로 전에 마지막 장의 마지막 문장이 AI에 관한 그런 내용이었어요. 실제로 AI에 대해서 어떻게 생각을 하고 계신가요?
I've observed technology. I started in 1982 in the industry, so you could figure out the things that I've seen. And when I started, you couldn't make a mistake that would cost $5 million. It would be hard because somebody would see it being done, no matter how noisy a trading room would be or whatever. If somebody said something wrong, backwards, the wrong commodity, the wrong price.
You kind of notice it.
And stare at them and intuit that it was wrong. But now that things are being done by computers, and you don't do a trade every 5 minutes, you do 5,000 trades every 1 minute because things are going faster and speedier and you don't see it exercised. And the formulas are driving by itself. That's today. That's before AI. It's a problem. And in other words, with AI, it's going to help. It's going to not only process your decision making as if they're just following a software path, it's actually creating its own, it's acting as your agent. It's exercising what used to be called judgment. How do you see that? How do you intuit whether it's making making a mistake and it's doing everything at hyper speed. So if you ever found out it was a mistake, you wouldn't know it until so much had been done. So what I'm saying is that technology is leverage, and leverage is two ways. I'm just talking about economics. And so I said, I made an analogy. It's not just in trading rooms and in the economy that you have this leverage that creates a danger. It's also in the physical world, because in Union Carbide in Bhopal, and literally it was tragic, but single-digit thousands of people died. In a nuclear age, it could be tens of million people. Again, technology, the things that make life easier and safer from the 50-year storm might make the world more dangerous in the 100-year storm, because you can't really intuit or see it. So now people know that AI makes mistakes. So people are very, very suspicious, and they check things and they don't rely on things because they know there are hallucinations in AI. But what happens when we get to the point where we start to rely on it? And who will be the one to see that it's making a mistake or thwarting us? And that's the danger to come. I don't have an answer to it, but this is a process that's been going on for a long time. And even in a trading room, the consequences of an error in a bad software program could do 100 times more damage than any individual could have done before you relied on software. And AI will only make that a greater issue.
That's true. AI가 많은 것을 변화를 시킬 것이다 라고 말씀을 해주셨는데, 그렇다면은 월스트리트의 역할도 이거 덕분에 많이 바뀌게 될까요?
Of course they'll change, but they'll change in predictable ways. I'll tell you what won't change. There'll be people who want to do activities but don't want to do those activities if they involve certain risks. So there'll be people who want to shed risks, and other people who for a price will take on those risks. And so, there'll be people who want to hedge their currency, and people who want to take on that currency risk because they get paid to take it on, or the risk of the aluminum price, or the risk on interest rates. And so that'll take different forms. There'll be different technologies to deliver it. There'll be different models that'll compute the math and how the price should be, but there'll still be that need to risk taking. And there'll still be people who have wealth that they don't know what to do with, and they want to find the best places to invest. And there'll be people who come up out of nowhere with great ideas and don't know how to finance it. And those people won't necessarily meet each other. There'll have to be some way to get the people with the wealth and the people with the ideas to meet with each other, so that those ideas can be financed, and so people will have good investments. And so it'll take different technologies and different forms. But what I just described to you in general has been done for thousands of years in different ways. It's been done, now it gets done by the internet. It used to be done by ships, and people traveling to different places. And somebody going to, Asia and finding products that weren't available in Europe, and months of travel to bring it. Now it happens instantaneously, but it's still the same stuff being done.
Right. 자, 저희 채널의 구독자분들이 사실 회장님이랑 좀 비슷한 면이 많습니다. 굉장히 지식을 사랑하고 궁금증이 많고 그런 분들이 많은데, 그분들한테 이 책을 읽음으로써 내가 굉장히 좀 늦게 깨달았던 삶의 교훈을 그래도 나보다는 좀 일찍 깨달을 수 있었으면 좋겠다. 그 한 가지만 좀 말씀을 해주시면 좋을 것 같아요.
Don't give up. And in fact, one of the things about, certainly American culture, I can't speak for the wide world, is there's an appreciation for people who fail and get up and strike out again. That's actually, not only do you get forgiven for your mistake, you get rewarded for your resilience. So I would say curiosity, like when you say your subscribers are very curious and want to learn, I love that. Not everybody in the world wants to learn or invest the time. And also resilience, because we'll go in a lot of wrong directions. Look, people are going to live a long time now, longer than life expectancy is going out. You have plenty of time. Some things will work, some things won't work. But you have to be philosophical about those things. Everybody, you survive. Not only do you survive your mistakes, you learn from them and you go forward. And that's what I learned over time. But I think, I could tell that to people, but I think everyone has to learn that themselves. There's certain things that you can learn from a book and some things you learn from experience.
Right. So would that be your definition of being successful in life, to be resilient?
Well, I think that leads to success in life. But again, success in life has to be more than just your economic well-being. Look, if you're poor, then all you think about is making enough money to feed your family. But once you you've accomplished that 10 times over, life has to be and success has to be defined by other things. Happiness, family. Here's another thing. It's good to be well-rounded. It's not only good to be a well-rounded person for itself, but being well-rounded helps you in every other narrow thing you do because it gives you a broad perspective. And in this coming world where things are uncertain and you don't know what jobs need to be done or you don't know the direction of anything, making yourself broadly knowledgeable and able to identify patterns that are important today, but maybe important 5 years from now when technology, in other words, making yourself broader and well-rounded and curious about the world around you, that's very important.
Right. So read a lot, right? Okay. I don't think we have you for long. So would you like to say goodbye to our viewers before we end the interview?
I hope it's not goodbye forever, but I enjoyed this very much. And so goodbye. I hope you all go out and get the book and enjoy it. I say people should have questions. So if you have questions, ask them. And it would be helpful if you are authentically curious.
Oh, that's perfect. Okay. Thank you so much, Mr. Blangpine.
Well, thank you, Agnew. I've enjoyed this very much.
네, 오늘 정말 인사이트 가득한 이야기를 회장님과 나눠봤습니다. 자, 오늘 나온 이야기들 그리고 더 많은 이야기들이 이 생존지능이란 책에 다 포함이 되어 있으니까요. 꼭 읽어보시길 바랍니다. 자, 저희는 다음에 더 재미있고 유익한 주제로 다시 찾아오도록 하겠습니다. 시청해주신 여러분 고맙습니다.